Hello, and welcome to Commendable Commotion, where the creative arts intersect with the strange world of parapolitics. I am Matthew Tannum LG, and today I'll be talking to a friend of mine named Mark Lopez. Mark recently helped me with some of the filming for my upcoming documentary, Mothman, the film that never was. Mark's a former resident of Ohio and West Virginia, so he was very familiar with the region where I was making my film, and he kindly drove me around the terrain to do some filming back in the summer of 2023. My documentary will tell the true story of a film crew who went to Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1997 to make a film about the legendary, and now famous, Mothman. But instead, the film crew ran into something much darker and much more real. This conversation you're about to hear with Mark took place before I first talked publicly on the Nick Bryant Podcast about the very dark topics explored in my documentary. So that's why Mark and I are both quite vague in this particular conversation. After watching or listening to this chat, I'd encourage you to check out my recent interview on the Nick Bryant Podcast to find out what sort of dark secrets Mark and I are actually alluding to in this chat. Also, you can keep up to date on my documentary's progress by following Commendable Commotion on the socials. And I'm also setting up a Substack which will have written updates about the film and articles about other strange topics. After Mark and I talk about the film, you'll hear about his life, his own documentary endeavours, and the time he lived in a tent in Costa Rica. So without further ado, here is Mark Lopez. Would you be able to for the people who are unfamiliar for the moment, would you be able to describe what we worked on recently, what you helped me work on in West Virginia several months ago,
Oh yeah, we
without any spoilers, what can people? So the film, obviously, for those unfamiliar, is Mothman, the film that never was. It's a documentary that I'm making, and you, Mark, very kindly helped me. You did some brilliant driving around West Virginia and Ohio, and we did some filming of the scenery, and we interviewed some people.
detective work. We
Yeah,
did
yeah, it
detective work.
was detective work of the finest caliber, and certainly, we pulled something off. It was brilliant. What exactly, without giving away the stuff that's going to be revealed in the documentary about Point Pleasant, West Virginia, very historic place. What
Right.
can people expect without giving it away? What, in your view, what can people expect from this documentary that's coming out?
Right. This is a gumshoe detective narrative, on the trail, following a story that was very there was a mystery to it. So the narrative addresses the mystery and takes on trying to break it down and dissect it by pieces. And so that involves some detective work, and it's like a gumshoe detective. It's a bit of a noir. There's some like darker elements to it, and we had to traverse the culture a little bit more than just being in the safety of the car and like taking things like there had to be some face-to-face interaction that actually had a bit of risk involved to it because you're dealing with strangers. And the thing is, in my experience, that they're kinder in West Virginia than they are Ohio. However, the provincial attitude can be one of xenophobia for sure. I mean, that's like as common as it gets. And so there's a risk there. And it's not an innocent part of the world either. So it's like people, weird things happen there. Like I was working at a gas station, not, uh, this, not while you were around, this didn't happen. But one of the times I was working, this guy came in and the customer walks in, he walks out, and this guy, my coworker, goes to me, he's like, that dude just got out of prison recently because he was hanging out with a girl who overdosed on heroin, and he didn't want to tell the police, so he put her bag in a garbage bag in the back of his work truck and was driving around town with it and got pulled over with it. Or like somebody discovered it when he was at a job and they called the police. And it's just like, like that's that county where we were.
Yeah.
That's over there,
So,
Mason County, West Virginia, and Gallia County, Ohio. AKA that's part of Appalachia for those that might not be familiar with this part of the world. So Appalachia is a very rural, um, old school area. There's coal miners in West Virginia. There's farmers. There's like a nuclear power plant. It's like a lot of people are very patriotic. Plenty of people sign up for the military, from these environments. So it's that rural, small town culture. And plus, Ohio has its own vibe. It's probably the least friendliest place in the States that I know of.
Okay. I have not spent much time in Ohio beyond when we were briefly there over the river in the lovely town of Gallipolis, I believe
Right.
is how you pronounce it. I mean, certainly though, like I understand what you're saying. I know there's a darkness, and that'll come forth in this documentary, Mothman, the film that never was. It's a darkness that hasn't been examined before, to be honest with you, about this town. But there are plenty, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. But there are plenty of nice people, to be honest with you. Like it's looking at a recent historical darkness, not
Right.
a, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think
Right.
it's the current darkness. So
It's
I
not.
mean,
It's not.
they're really
It's
nice
it's not.
sides,
It's
but
not a prevailing. It's not a prevailing influence. It's just like the stuff that's a prevailing dark influence isn't necessarily the things that you touched on, but the things you touched on are important for media, and people need to understand this more. Like they made that film a couple years ago called The Offer about the story about how The Godfather was made. Did you
oh
ever see
yeah, yeah,
that?
yeah,
Yeah, The Offer, right? Right.
yeah,
So there was some real dark stuff to that story too in real
right.
life, that translated the film. And it's important that people understand these relationships more. People in general need to understand more about how business and media and art and politics and media and newsrooms and all this stuff, how they work in a nuts and bolts way, where people that have interest in business might use their throw their weight around to see a story not come to the light or to see the story change before it gets released, to protect certain interests or elements. Uh, and it's important that we learn about the manipulation of storytelling and manipulation of what people are allowed access to culturally and what people are allowed to poke their nose around in, and how sometimes other people get triggered by other people's investigations and looking into stuff, and then figuring out like there's a valuable lesson in there. Like how many times has what happened in what the story that you were researching and uncovering and revealing, how many times has that happened in the government? How many times has that happened in the government, man? You know what I mean? And it's not exactly the same, but there's a similar. Somebody wanted to tell a story, and other people got wind of it and said, "I don't know about that. I don't know if you're going to tell that story or not."
That's
Like
It's an interesting comparison. It really is. No, I mean it's a good question. Now, just so people aren't confused, we're not talking about any darkness on or deliberate obfuscation or complications caused by anyone in the
right,
crew of this unreleased
right,
man film my film examines. Not the
right,
director, not the producer, not the actors, not the crew. No one. It's nothing to do with the crew. It is
right.
a historical recent darkness in this now tourist hotspot, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There are plenty of nice people in that region as
Oh
well. And
yeah,
I would
definitely,
agree. It
definitely,
really
absolutely.
hospitable, lovely people. Yeah, that's
Yeah, for sure, man. I lived both in Gallipolis and Point Pleasant. Uh, I lived in Point Pleasant twice, actually, in an apartment above a flower shop called the Flower Nook, and that
yeah,
was in the heart of town. And I worked for the Census Bureau. That was in the year 2000.
yeah.
So I had to walk around that whole town in Point Pleasant with a stack of documents and knock on people's doors that didn't answer, fill out their form, and interview them. So I got some real interesting stories and experiences from the people there. But what's it's interesting is that this is a powerful and typical formula for what we could call impoverished areas. Where there's certain elements that have strangleholds. And it's like that in Costa Rica. Like they don't do anything to support the farmers. For example, in Uvita, that's the town at the coast below here in the mountain. I'm about 800 meters right now from the mountain. So on the coastal town, they sell at times to exploit the high season of tourists. They sell avocados from Mexico for about $10 a kilo. That's so crazy. They have plenty of avocados that grow in Costa Rica. Why aren't they helping the Costa Rican farmers sell those avocados for roughly $10 US a kilo?
Right.
there's a lesson in that, man. And this is why we need our community of independent media and creators, so that we don't get preyed upon someday by some force that's a similar thing that wants to suppress one's capacity to tell stories and explore.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, well said, well said. And certainly there are elements of that in, again, not on the part of the crew of the unreleased
right,
Man film at all,
right,
nothing to do with them, and
right,
nothing to do with the vast majority of the people of Point Pleasant and the
right,
Appalachia
right,
region, the valley, as it
right.
were.
It's a small nexus
Yeah,
of power, and that's usually how it works, right? Like, out people that have power, money want to keep that, and they don't want it spreading out. So, but that's a broad generalization. So, yeah, man, I think there's some interesting things at foot, and one of the interesting things too that I wanted to tell people about, that's on my YouTube Shorts, I believe, and I labeled as the Mothman's Hideouts. You remember that, those series of caves out there at TNT?
did you put that on your YouTube? I don't think I've seen that. That's awesome.
There's two layers here that are really important. There's the work you're doing, and then there's the concept of the community of independent creators, independent media, people that aren't gonna sell their soul to Starbucks and Coca-Cola,
Yeah,
um, so that they can get their media career successful. So I think that there's a forward thinking dynamic here, that it's more than the conversation. It's stuff that we're going to do together in the future, or that we'll know other people in different contexts that are part of a community that create things that relate to media, man. And
yeah,
that's, I mean, the fact that you don't have to be a mainstream person, or some kind of weird sellout, or go to some weird power structure circle like Puff Daddy, and like that weirdness in the music industry,
yeah,
Epstein and Harvey Weinstein and all those horror stories
yeah.
there. Like, I'm not going to end up on that path. You're not going to end up on that path. I think the people that are going to be relevant to this part of life also are not going to be those type of people. And yeah, thank you for all your effort, man. It's a tremendous effort. I'm so excited to see your film. I can't wait. I've been excited to see it for months, man. I'm just like super elated. And I don't know, did you mention there's a film festival uh, in August, May? No, June?
So there's a Mothman festival in Point Pleasant every September. I don't know if they're gonna be able to screen the film. Be nice, brilliant if they would. We will see. What sort of, frankly, kind of bizarre things can people expect from this Mothman, the film that never was, the documentary I'm making that you very kindly helped me with?
Well, I think what can be a revelation for some is to understand the relationship between the production of media and politics. Now, politics doesn't necessarily have to mean above board, but there's street politics too. That's a real thing. It's a real influence in society, just as much as the congressional politics, are a part of society. So it's definitely going to be a 101 on that understanding and examining that relationship. I think it's going to have some like quaint, somewhat backwoods, humor at times. Like,
Yeah,
people just kind of have these kind of personalities that I think in general you take a kind of smile at. They're just kind of like, they're not quite relics, but they're in that realm of like stuff that the people in the bigger cities and suburbs and out of the Appalachian area are gonna think is kind of like some mom and pop antique store somewhere. You know what I mean? And it's
yeah,
just like, when you bring these layers of personality to the surface about those cultures, it's surprising, because it gives you a different, even more well-rounded view of something you might have thought of as like, oh wow, that could happen there. They could have that kind of intrigue in this environment. Like, I thought
exactly,
these people were just backwoods, mom and pop types. That nothing ever happened. And that's not the case. So there
exactly.
could be some surprises for the viewer there.
Oh yeah, yeah, there definitely will be.
So essentially, man, I'm 8 months deep into this story of being up in the rainforest here at this jungle tilapia farm bar restaurant, and it's essentially a work trade. Um, Yeah, so this is an East meets West story, man. It's a
It
very
is.
much East meets. It is, man. I'm a gringo. I have a lot of experience here in the rainforest in Latin America, but nonetheless, I'm still a gringo. Nothing changes that. I'm from cities and suburbs, and this is a very hardcore rural environment. Cowboys and farmers. So I stick out like a sore thumb, and I always have. This whole thing is like my life university. This is spirit and life and God and all these things working with me through all these years and all these things I've been doing here, living in a tent for a year, working in the coffee field. A long list of very intense experiences and circumstances and challenges that have helped purify me and align me to a greater understanding of life, myself, healing, and service to life. What the challenge is that I don't have an equal say in the company. I work for this guy. So, imagine if you coming from university and a PhD program, intellectual background, went to live in Appalachia and had to work with them, and then you were going to try to tell them things that don't make sense about what they do. They're
Yeah.
not going to want to hear it because you're not from their environment. And let's say if you were in the US, you're from another country. So I always have to come back to that understanding. I'm a foreigner in this country, although I've made my identity legit, like like more or less as a national. Other than that, I don't have residency yet. I always have to remember that I didn't grow up in this environment. I wasn't picking coffee at 5 years old. You know what I mean? Like they certain parts of their background in their childhood was tougher physically than mine, and that can be a point of contention culturally if you're not careful. So the things that happen here that don't make sense, in this kind of remote, rural area, that's the
Yeah.
what's the word for the agronomy, the agricultural, the agrarian, that's the word I was looking for, the agrarian lifestyle, the agrarian paradigm. So I just have to remember I'm always an outsider no matter how many times I prove myself. And the guy I work for will never listen to me. And it's not like, it's just an understanding like life is giving me a boat. And the boat could have been me helping this guy for 10 years, but that doesn't work because I don't have a say in it and he's not going to want to listen to me. So, we have a good relationship and a good friendship, but I'm very much interested in moving on in my life and not losing touch of media. I'm not really into the whole, I had my years of wonder here living in the rainforest. I don't really care anymore. Like I like media, I like communication. I like certain technology, social media. That's the stuff that I want my future to be. And the relationship that you and I have developed is a huge, crossing of a threshold for me, you know, uh, and I think it was actually the first time I was ever on Zoom was the first time we talked. That was in 2022. And I
Really?
was in Costa Rica. Yeah. Yeah. I think that was the first time I actually ever used Zoom. So,
I mean,
so,
I mean, are you going to still living in Costa Rica? I mean, you mentioned about how you're entering a sort of new part of your life. I mean, are you planning on moving back to America or?
I have no interest or desire to go back to the States ever. I've been going back and forth for 13 years, and I'm growing older now, and it's like I'm tired of it, and I have no more interest in that. And it creates so much chaos for me that I just can't do it. I have no interest in that. So essentially, I'm just trying to develop the best I can here. But if immigration kicks me out, I have a work visa case, and they're gonna decide it probably this month. It takes a long time here to get that done, but if they kick me out, I have to leave, at least for a while. So I don't know what I'm going to do in that case. I probably have to go back to the States most likely, unless I find some other opportunity that takes me to someplace else.
I see.
Um,
I see. And like I know we've probably talked about this before, sort of off the air, but just for people unfamiliar, why exactly? I mean, when did you live in a tent in Costa Rica, and why? Why?
oh, okay. So, right, to contextualize for those that don't know the story or that aren't or are new to our channels, etc. I felt called by life to learn about how to live outside of city and suburb paradigms. Basically restaurants and supermarkets, which is all I really knew growing up for the most part. And life maneuvered me into the situation where I got wind of somebody who's a friend of my family has this land for sale in Costa Rica. And I got in touch with them after not speaking for almost 20 years. And I flew to California. I was in San Francisco. We made a plan. And my plan was to get involved in ecotourism, escape the United States, and learn about farming and living off grid. And that's what rationally I was in it for. But what I realized is that life and all its majesty and all the different forms of, you know, otherworldly guidance and spiritual guidance that we receive that isn't necessarily a human thing. It's some kind of higher power. I don't really have a religion. I don't practice religion, but I do have a strong sense of spirituality. So these things really mean something to me. When I talk about it, I've been greatly moved by a lot of signs and miracles and synchronicity. So that's what was occurring. All these things aligned in my life. My stars aligned, and I flew to California. That was in November of 2010. We deliberated for 6 weeks on how to do it, and then we decided to buy a car off of Craigslist and drive to Costa Rica with our stuff. So we literally drove from California all the way to Costa Rica with a packed 1994 Pathfinder that we bought off of Craigslist, and we even had money in our budget for bribes. And we got robbed by the police, so we actually allotted enough money in our budget, and we calculated it correctly for all the money we had to pay the police when we got robbed. I mean, it happened twice. Once it was like bigger, the other time it was smaller. That was its own movie. That was its own side story. So we get to Costa Rica. That's January of 2011. And I have a tent and I have a piece of land I bought sight unseen. It's about 600 meters squared. So it's like a triangle like this on a hill. And I didn't know what the heck to do. There was banana and plantain trees. So I dug a little space and put my tent. And it was just like some movie. This city kid comes to the rainforest in another country, has no idea what he's doing, and tries to live. And that's what happened basically. It was like basically the movie Dances with Wolves meets a B-budget stoner comedy. You know what I mean? It was just like those type of like genres, like boom. So yeah, I kind of became they adopted me, and I lost like let's say 17 or 18 kilos. It's about 42 pounds in my first episode, which was 20 months straight. And it was just like Life University, rubber meets the road, man. Like I had to learn how to do the visa runs and go to Panama and Nicaragua. I had to learn how to walk really far through the mountain with a heavy pack. I had to learn how to plant things, and I got to climb trees and harvest. So it was really like a huge honeymoon story that has some brutal elements to it, but overall it's just like the most serendipitous adventure one could find themselves on. You're waking up every day in a tent and you're on your own property and you just have to figure it out from there, man. I mean, it was just like the thrill of a lifetime. And then the owner of this company where I work now, the bar restaurant, the same Pueblo, we met about 4 months after I got here, and then we about 2 months after we met, we started building my house, and that was my scene for 10 years. So on my channel, there's a Costa Rica playlist, obviously. You can see all that kind of stuff there. And you can see a timeline from like the first year of 2011 to the last year I lived there as the owner of my place in 2020. And then by 2021, I had officially signed it over completely to some other expats. So that's how I have this story here. And then I moved on to other parts of the country, got back to my urban roots, and was just like, you know what? I was thinking about these people as it's like an extended family, and I didn't really want to be around them because this is a very raw experience. And to be frank, the Westerners that have migrated to Costa Rica and the nationals, the locals that are the country people, our worlds don't work very well together on a day-to-day basis. But we can share periods of time together and projects, and it's a lot of fun. But more than that, it doesn't work. And it's like I've seen the same formula in many different stories, not just my own here. It's the same thing each time. So I took it as Life University, got over the frustration and resentment of it, of all the like pain and stuff I went through. But I was 3 years here. I didn't want to be in touch with them. And then I started getting signs and intuitions, and just decided to follow through with it. And then I got in touch with them, and it all aligned again. The signs started pointing to this. I came down here and it all started coming together. So the lawyers told me if I do this for 5 years straight, I can get my residency. But I think what's going to happen is that I'm going to end up meeting, well, I think I already know the person I'm going to marry, but I'm not in a relationship with her. So I think that person and I are going to work it out, and it's not going to have anything to do with the story here, but this is the bridge that stabilized me getting to that point in my life, which is the most important thing for me, aside from my relationship to media. Those are like my two main goals in life, like media presence, success there, and the 100% love story, true love, that whole thing. So I've lived a very over the top life, a lot of crazy things, but that is, I'm like very wholesome and non-jaded at this point in life about love, and that's really what the bottom line is. It's like this has all prepared me for mastery in partnership and in media and leadership within business. So essentially now I'm in the baby stage. I'm in learning how to walk with this idea of all the experience I've accrued in the last 20 years through living coast to coast in the States, Europe, Central America. I worked on Wall Street. I lived in the rainforest, a lot of intense stuff. Didn't have a prestigious job on Wall Street, but did work there. And that just, I realize now that it was all like getting me to this point where I don't even have anything to do with my past. And that's a weird thing, but it had such an influence on you and so much impact. But then it takes you to a point where you're like, you got to decide if you're going to get on that boat or not. Like, am I going to go to the like final frontier of my destiny, or am I going to like balk and stall or not do it because it leaves a lot of where I come from behind completely. So that's basically where I'm at now, man. It's like how to continue working on developing these relationships and this creativity. I've been experimenting making biographies on my channel.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're like little satirical things. Sometimes it's just like shorts or abstract art. Other times it's me with the guitar. I'm into music. So my premise is Come One, Come All. It's the name of my channel. And I really love the name of your channel. By the way, I'm really into names and words. Words are a thing for me. So I found the name of your channel, Commendable Commotion, I was like, oh, I love it. It's beautiful
Thank you.
because it's like it has an eloquent ring to it, and I like that's kind of my perception of you based on what we've shared thus far in our connection. Is that you're like a thoughtful, eloquent person that's a brilliant academic mind, and like you're in the media world. So I think whatever happens, it's like you're anchored with something that um, has resonates in a positive way in a strong sense. I love the name Commendable Commotion just hits it right on the head, man.
Well,
And I just
I'm very glad that's your perception of me, but I'm just wondering, like, I'm sorry for going back to the tent, but I'm just so interested in knowing, did you know that you were going to be living in literally in a tent? And also, though, I think, though, I do want to ask, you mentioned your past being away from you by living in where you're living now in Costa Rica.
right.
Is it that you want to erase your past? You want to erase yourself and start anew, or is it just that you want to, put enter a different way of living? I'm just kind of wondering about that.
Yeah, as far as the tent was concerned, I did know that that was the plan. Because of the climate here, it's very possible. It was still tough at times, but I had a single bed, and then about let's say 4 months into it, I got a two-room tent. And then I upgraded the size of the mattress, and then my life got a lot more comfortable. However, there was a lot of stress and anxiety. I had basically like a. Did you guys ever watch Gilligan's Island growing up? Did you ever see that show? It's a
I
popular thing in the States.
Yeah, I mean, plenty of people did.
Right,
I don't
right,
know if I've seen it, but plenty. Yeah.
right. So imagine this like shack, four posts, wooden posts with a slanted roof, and my tent underneath it. And that's how I spent the first. Let's see, that was from January to August, and then August I had to move into another tent, and we started construction. By mid-October, I had to move into a house next door because the rain and the wind got so bad in the peak of the wet season that I couldn't make it in the tent anymore. And then we finished my house at about 3 days before Christmas, man, and that was one of the most glorious moments of my life thus far.
Yeah.
Oh, it was I mean, to have spent that first year in such a grueling battle, but with so much adrenaline and inspiration. Um,
And did you want to
and
sort
yeah,
of
that
like, was it about erasing part of
right.
yourself, or was it just
The,
that you wanted to live in a new way? Because I mean, saying that you want to put your past behind
yeah,
you. I mean,
to speak to that question, it was inspiration and reconciliation of failure and letdowns. Like I had some entitled fails as a young man. Like I flunked out of university twice, and it's like I'm 44 now. You know what I mean? Like that's my fuck up story. Most people our age like have something they did that was just crap. And that was this the top tier crap in my like young adult life. Flunking out of university, being so irresponsible about it. So I felt like, although I was 31 when I started here, I felt like I had something to prove. just to myself and to life and to other people who have been supportive of me in general, and forgiving of my like errors and sins and so on. So yeah, it was just this great intersection of all these different elements, man. Everything happened at once. It was the reconciliation of the past and letdowns and disappointments and failures from the past, mixed with my hope and inspiration for the future. And between the ages of 24, which is when I changed my life, I got out of a lot of trouble and personal just negativity. So from 24 to 31, I took over. I like was on the world stage doing everything I could. And 31 is when got here and started in the tent, and that's what brought me out of a very swag-driven, ego-driven mentality and frame of mind into embracing the personal growth and the vulnerability and the maturity and the different layers of decompartmentalization. And that's really helped me. This way of life and this story here has really helped me decompartmentalize my life. And I think that's what part of the essence of salvation is, essentially, where some people say that, light is an embodiment of good because it wants to show you something. And the darkness is an embodiment of the evil in us because we want to conceal, hide, and distort things that we're afraid of or that could cause us problems or, backlash from our negative actions. So, yeah, man, I really just transmuted and alchemized a lot of darkness that I felt and negativity, and just it came out the other side like better than ever and like purified and more mature and more grounded and less like chasing women all the time and just being crazy, and kind of like swag, and thankfully, I've just outgrown that stage of life. But I've come to see it as a paradigm, as a something like an archetype within a paradigm. I'm like, oh yeah, this is a metamorphosis, and now I'm one of the representatives or ambassadors of that concept. Like I couldn't drive a stick shift car to save my life. I don't know how to treat a dog as a veterinarian. I'm not a good carpenter. I can paint, I can type, I can teach guitar, I play guitar a lot. But it's like this whole thing about self-esteem and the transformation of self is my calling in life. I wasn't meant to be a father. I have no children of my own, and uh, it's just one of those things you're innately fashioned by life for. And this is like my training ground essentially to make me that counselor. But the counselor isn't going to be in I don't have a calling in an academic career sense. I'm not going to be in an office and at my own practice. I'm going to be here making shows and programs disseminating what I've learned through this 20-year voyage on the quote unquote seeker path. And so that was one of the great purifying stages of my secretdom, if you will.
And with
Is the
your
tent?
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just kind of going on there.
Well, I mean, just with your, your YouTube channel, Come One, Come All. So as you
Yeah.
mentioned, you have videos of your life in Costa Rica there. You have a biographical film, or one of them, that I've watched recently, maybe a few months ago, actually, called,
Yeah.
yeah, I Am Gen Z. Wasn't that the name of it?
I am Gen X.
Gen X, sorry, Gen X. And so,
Right.
what exactly, what made you get into this sort of filmmaking, documentary making side of things? Any inspirations, any figures who you thought, oh wow, that film was great, or that's inspirational, and or I mean, I'm just wondering about that. It's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a child and a teenager of the 80s and 90s. That's like some of the best storytelling in film from the Western world. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
Like for me, like, people like I don't remember. But you were born in 84 or 86? I don't remember.
Me? No, I was born in
Yeah.
97. 97.
Okay, 97. Right. So you are like at the earliest part of, or no, you're like in the middle of the millennial, right?
Yeah.
Like, is that how you guys figured it? Or
Uh, I
so
believe, yeah. The term Gen Z is sort of thrown around a lot. That's kind of a term that,
right, it's
yeah,
somewhere like millennial, Gen Z, that
yeah,
territory. So
yeah, yeah,
the people in my age group, basically that, like, let's say born from 68 to 83, somewhere around then,
yeah.
we are so enamored with the world that we grew up with media and music and culture, because of how the downward spiral that a lot of us have seen. Some of us say that it's hard to find good music after the year 2000. And of course, that's a broad generalization. Of course, there's plenty of good music after year 2000, but as far as an overwhelming cultural movement like we had in the 80s and 90s, it's a lot more difficult. It's not as prominent, and you can see things declining and declining. You can see the level of insanity that we've declined to through mainstream and alternative media now, especially in the States, with this wokester, gender ideology, the open borders, the fentanyl crisis, the censorship. There's just a long list of things that are like, bringing what I perceive to be our collective attitude to a different place of like disdain and like wistfulness and nostalgia. But I'm not giving up, man. I know that there's something iconic in my upbringing that I can imbue into media, and I've always had an aptitude for storytelling, communication. So I want, and self-employment. So I want those things to mold together beautifully. In the sense, like, I don't want to just be on the chopping block anymore, man. I've been in the gig economy, worked for companies, done all sorts of shit. It's like where it's at is self-employment and aligning with those in the creative spirit of alternative media. I think that is going to be our patron saint for the rest of this century, the rest of my lifetime. I'm 44 now. I plan on being around for another 40, 45 years, man. Alternative media is, in the community that we create, the lot of us, and the way that we support each other and help that we don't end up like this in a mortgage with an office job that exploits us, like the dark side of the older world. You know what I mean? Where like a company
Yeah.
like Kodak, you
Yeah.
remember? I think it was Kodak, where they screwed their employees, like lifelong employees, off out of their pension. It's one of those stories. It's an example of like corporate malfeasance. Where
Right.
I believe it was Kodak that did that to their employees, or some of their employees that were like lifelong, and they screwed them out of a pension. And that's just a random example. I mean, there's all sorts of it. But also the trouble in people finding jobs after they spent exorbitant amounts on college degrees. That's another fallacy. And the psychotic housing market. Oh my God, man! It's like we're facing some really heavy stuff, and the way that we fight back is to make art through community, art in the broad sense of the term, through communities, and that we have these alternative networks that aren't so smashed, so weighed down upon with the iron fist like YouTube, and Facebook and Instagram, the things that are hyper censored and shadow banning and all that, like that BS.
So the sort of
So yeah,
polarization, the sort of polarization that you sort of mentioned, ideological polarization, people with different opinions, and sometimes can get quite fiery at times, and
right.
the economic hardships you mentioned. Do you think it's more intense in the USA? Like for people outside of America listening or watching this, I mean, like, do you think it's more intense than say in Europe? I mean, just what's your opinion as an American? I'm just wondering.
I think that the world outside of America has been exposed to more hardship uh, than the United States. However, the United States is brutal. It's difficult. It's stressful. It's competitive. There's a lot of violence. So there's a misperception based on a certain genre of tourists outside the U.S. that life in the U.S. is candy ass, easy, a bunch of overweight people with money just doing nothing but going to the mall. And that's not very much of society. It is there, but it's not even close to half.
Yeah.
Not even close.
No.
So there are some stereotypes that I think that are erroneous ideas for day-to-day life. However, the world outside of the U.S. has been accustomed to the brutality of the physical world and the brutality of the corporate. Um, I don't know. Should we call it hegemony? The corporate dominated world. Like for reason, international corporations are why Costa Rica got to its superpower status, and yet those corporations exploited the people in really horrific ways in certain areas. Like there was a lot of cases of impotence or sterile, becoming sterile after working in the banana farms, the banana plantations. There's there's histories, there's traditions of that. So it's this weird, or it's a layered, better put, layered story of both benefits and damages. However, the difference is that what's great about the States is that there's so many opportunities to lift yourself up. And oh, it says the connection's unstable. Sorry. Uh, that there's so many opportunities to lift oneself up and elevate. And after working in some of the agricultural jobs here in this brutal climate up in the mountain, down on the beach, that climate, oh God, it's like there's a part of me that would rather be an accountant, as much as that sounds like a death sentence to me, than have to work in the field for a few dollars an hour and then live in the cowboy culture. That's more or less should be about a university experience. It shouldn't be where people from the Western world make their life, unless you're independently wealthy and you don't have to be trapped here and you can like zip in and out. Other than that, it's like I'm very much convinced of these modalities of learning, but that we're meant to come back to our own creator. And we're the forefathers. We're the forefathers of the new internet, of the new consciousness, of the new world. It's going to be our face on digital Mount Rushmore someday. It's up to people like us, man. It's up to the ones that are going to expose themselves, be vulnerable, keep going, admit their fails and their shortcomings, and be honest about it, and like integrate that, alchemize it to become something better later. This is our destiny, man. We're not going to be shackled to any a notion of like, well, you just got to pay your dues. You got to get that 30-year mortgage. You got to stick with the job that you don't feel for, with the boss that treats you terribly because you need that money. Suck it up, suck it up and grin. Don't confront your relationship with your partner if it's not completely real, or if it's not completely honest. Like these things, man, we need a radical sense of vulnerability. And I think that the next renaissance is going to be a renaissance of culpability. And that in the Western world, at least me speaking from the States and growing up there, we don't have good self-esteem in how we take accountability for ourselves. There's so many ways to default on that and to just pass it off, whether it's money, it's entertainment, whether it's partying, whether it's hiding your stuff behind your cultural identity and saying, well, it's the liberals, it's the blacks, it's the Hispanics, it's the Jews, it's the conservatives, it's the MAGA people, it's the, that's really common in the States. Really, really common. And that is a substitute for self-esteem. That does not include vulnerability for culpability. And that, I think, is what's going to make my creative relationships supercharged, man, with something really exciting, dude. I have a lot of stories I want to tell. I want to talk about being Gen X. That's really important to me. I think that we are the next ones to ascend to the throne on the planet, and that we are the ones that are like the what's the word, midwife, or the bridge between the analog and the digital world,
Yeah.
and like Z and what do you call it, baby boomers. So this stuff, I want to keep coming back to being invigorated by technology and not disheartened by it. I want to be inspired and enabled by it, not disempowered and stupefied by it, man. And that's, yeah, man, it's just great to be able to talk about this with somebody that, has a really smart persona to share, and that's what I'm experiencing with you. So
thank you, but thank you very much. But I'm just wondering, I mean, in terms of like what equipment do you use to film your documentaries? I mean, for example, we worked, which we'll talk about in a minute. You helped me on a film several months ago where I shot with just an iPhone 13 and a little attachable microphone, and editing and color grading an iMovie. What do you use for your projects?
Anything I can get my hands on, man. Just free apps that work with Windows. I'll pirate something if I can, film on my phone. Right, but the thing for me is stock footage. So that's what I make, like a short film. I use more of that than anything, right? Because I can be spastic with my like camera work, so I haven't really got consistently good at that. You know what I mean? Where sometimes I'm just like bopping around, and it doesn't have a fluid like movement to it. So I find that the stock footage world is fun also with combining the clips and making them and editing them, and where you take three things and you layer it on top of each other to the point where you've got kind of a psychedelic experience going on. So I've made some abstract stuff, some political statements that are on my channel. But this is all about the growth of them. And essentially, these are all segments. And what I want for the program, Come One, Come All, is to be like, about an hour maybe. meant to be an hour of segments. Like, okay, well, here's our conversation segment. Here's our did you know this will better your life segment. Here's my abstract art. Here's my goofball comedy. Here's my satire, political satire comedy. All these little blocks, and boom, it's like I want to see it. I want it to be 21st century Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson for the gringos, the older gringos like me and the older people, was a really famous television show. It's like like an entertainer. He would have guests on that would have music and comedy, but there's going to be a seeker and an educational theme to it. Sometimes it's not just going to be all pop culture hee-haw, but my background is 50-50, radical and mainstream, and I'm meant to be a synthesis of those two things to help bring things that are from the alternative into the public mainstream light. So that's why I'm not giving up on YouTube, and I'm not going to be cross platforming. And I get those things all the time from people, and I have a very it's counterintuitive, but I'm like, no, I only want YouTube. YouTube is going to prevail after all the BS and political strife and censorship. One day we're going to have a more free version, a more liberated version, a more honest version, a more empowered version of this medium, of this social media on YouTube. For now, we're caught in something that's pretty ugly, to be frank. But it's not going to be that way forever. I'm not going to go to BitChute. I'm not going to go to Rumble. I'm not going to post all my stuff on the 3, 4, 5 different venues. I believe in this wholeheartedly. This is something that I've spent so much time with YouTube. It's my destiny, and it's just like me being Gen X. I love it just the same way I'm like in my own skin. You know what I mean? It's me.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube certainly, you know, formative technology for my life as well. Many people of my age, if not all people of my age, to be honest with you. So I do relate to that. You have an attachment to YouTube is the impression I get, and I do too.
Yes,
Yeah,
that is. It's a great way to describe it. YouTube to me is the best thing we've got for education thus far.
yeah,
And as most of us know, you take your issues to YouTube. You're working on your car. You're working on your air conditioner. You need insight for a therapy. You want a recipe for something. Just I could keep going on with those examples. It's crazy, man. It's crazy how much time has been synthesized by this idea. You know what I mean? How many centuries, how many millions of hours has been condensed into this finger-friendly format. Boom, I've got somebody's life struggle in the palm of my hand.
yeah.
I'm taking their fruit from all their years of strife, and boom, I'm extracting that nugget of wisdom and value, and I'm gonna keep moving. Thank you. And they're gonna do the same to me. I want to embrace that process, and for my own gain. I don't want to be subject to society at large. I want to live in an apartment in the suburbs or city, and be married and have that be important. But yeah, I want to share my message with society at large, but I don't want to be the guy on the street all the time and like be rubbing shoulders with everybody. I feel like I'm getting older and just losing my. I mean, I've changed, and that's normal. You don't want to expend so much energy socializing for what isn't finely tuned to be right for you. You know what I mean? And when you're open to things as a social public person, you got to take on so many other things coming at you. And I've experienced that in teaching, and that's okay. But I realized, like, yeah, it doesn't have to be this way. I can share parts of myself and still have my personal space protected. My own privacy or my own stuff that has nothing to do with anybody else that other people wouldn't understand or support or be supportive of. You know.
I see. I understand. Before we finish up, where can people find you? Just remind people.
Yeah, I'm come one, come all. Spell it just like you write it at YouTube.
Perfect. And again, as you said earlier, Come One, Come All is the name of your YouTube channel. I'd encourage everyone to check that out. Really interesting stuff. Very
Thank you.
ambitious, very interesting content and documentaries you're making yourself. So brilliant. And thank you for joining for joining me
Oh
today.
man, this was epic, dude. I'm so happy we could share some time today, man. It was perfect time for it. We overcame our internet connection challenges. So
That's right. That's right. Well, you have a good evening, and thank you very much.
thanks, buddy. Peace out, man. Catch you on the next one, dude.